Hello everyone. The first two-thirds of CS220 topics cover the fundamental aspects about programming. If you were to go through a different computer science introductory level programming course, you'll find a lot of similarities with respect to the topics covered. Having a really good grasp on the fundamentals of programming will make it very easy for you to go through a different intro level CS programming course. The last one third of CS220 focuses on data science specific topics which are unique to CS220. Unlike the first two thirds of topics, the data science specific topics don't build on top of each other. We are rather going to have a set of lectures which are specifically associated with one data science concept, and then we'll be moving on to the next data science concept and so on. The topic for the next two lectures is going to be based on a module called as Pandas. Pandas is a really cool and awesome module which is going to make all of our lives easier. We are going to learn easier ways of doing things which we have all been doing using Python lists and dictionaries over the past few weeks. Since we are going to learn about a module, the next two lectures will follow a hands-on approach where we'll be using template notebook files in order to go through a lot of examples about various data structures associated with the Pandas module. Please make sure to download the template notebook file for tomorrow's lecture in order to follow along. Let me talk about the readings associated with the topic of Pandas. We have a custom reading for you, which was written by Tyler. There are two different ways for you to go through the readings. The first way is to use the HTML version, and the second way is to use the notebook version. I would strongly recommend you to follow the notebook reading because that will enable you to change the examples covered as part of the reading and try out other examples that you might be able to think of. The HTML file was generated from the notebook version, so you're not going to be missing anything by going through the notebook directly. In today's lecture, I'm going to show you how to create a markdown cell using Jupyter Notebook. Markdown cells enable you to type documentation associated with specific notebook cells where you're writing code. I'll be going through some of the examples covered as part of the readings in today's lecture demo. Let's talk about Pandas. The Pandas module enables us to deal with tabular data, which is nothing but tables. So far, we have been using the list of lists data structure in order to deal with CSV format, which is one kind of a tabular representation. The list of list data structure is not an adequate alternate to everything that you can do with an Excel dataset. Recall that it's difficult for us to deal with Excel dataset because of its binary format. It's difficult for us to write code in order to process the Excel dataset. Pandas is going to provide an easy and fast alternate for us to store and analyze tabular data. In today's lecture, we are going to learn about a new data structure called as series. Series is really cool because it's like a combination of a dictionary and a list. Since it's a hybrid of a dictionary and a list, you might be expecting to see each value have an associated key and an index. That's how exactly series data structure is defined. But unfortunately, the terminology associated with Pandas series is not consistent with respect to the terminology that we have been using for Python dictionary and list. In a Python dictionary, we use the term key to represent the label for a value, correct? Whereas in Pandas series, we are going to use the term index in order to represent the label for a value. We used to use the term index in order to represent Python list specific position of an item. Python list index is going to be equivalent to integer position term in Pandas series. It's a little bit confusing because we are now going to be using index in order to denote Python dictionary key equivalent. We'll get used to this strange terminology as we go through a few examples in order to understand Pandas series. Pandas series supports complicated expressions within the square bracket lookup. Let me do a quick recap of what we have been using the square bracket so far. We have used the square bracket in order to perform indexing within any sequence. We have also used it to perform slicing of a sequence. The third use case that we have covered is in order to perform a key lookup within a dictionary. Within the square brackets, Pandas series is going to enable us to type complicated expressions in order to evaluate them. Then we are going to talk about element-wise operation, which is going to enable us to apply a specific operator and an operand to every value inside the series data structure. Finally, we are going to cover what is called as Boolean indexing, which is a fun but complicated topic. In the next lecture, we'll be talking about data frames, which enable us to represent tables in Pandas. Every column in the data frame table will be based on a series that we'll be discussing in today's lecture. I'm sure that by now all of you would have run the pip install command in order to install Pandas. If you haven't done so, please go ahead and run the pip install command over here. So I'm going to show you how to import the Pandas module. You can simply say import Pandas. Then once you're done importing it, you can access the series by saying pandas.series. Since Pandas is famous and very oftenly used module, a lot of programmers don't want to keep typing Pandas over and over again. So they use a common abbreviation for Pandas module called as PD. Let me show you how you can abbreviate a module. So you'll simply say import Pandas as PD, and after abbreviating the module, you should be able to use series by saying pd.series. I promised you that I'll show you how to create a markdown cell in Jupyter Notebook. Let me go ahead and show you how to create one after this second import statement over here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus sign in order to insert a cell below that cell. Then I can go to cell and then click on cell type, and I'm going to click on markdown. That's going to enable us to type notes associated with the code cell that's going to show up below that. So you have specific format to follow within the markdown cell, inside the markdown cell, sorry. So when you type hash and then space and then type something, you're going to get the title formatting inside the markdown cell. If you type double hash, you're going to get subtitle. And then you can generate a list by saying hyphen space. That will just generate a bulleted list. Or you could generate a numbered list by saying 1 dot and 2 dot and so on. Once you're done typing the documentation, you can just run that cell just like any other code cell by pressing shift and enter. After you do that, you'll see a nicely formatted documentation that's being shown on the screen. Make sure to explore the markdown cells provided as part of today's lecture reading. As I mentioned, Pandas series is a combination of a dictionary and a list. So let me first show you how to create series from a dictionary. Let me define a simple dictionary here called D, which has 3 key value pairs. All of my keys are going to be strings and all of my values are going to be integers. So I am going to go ahead and display the dictionary D, and let me show you how to create Pandas series using that dictionary. So I can see pd.series of D here. We are going to use the parenthesis after the series, just like we use the parenthesis after any other type in Python. So you can say int of 2 or str of three. Similar to that, you're going to say pd.series of dictionary or pd.series of a list. So this is one way to create a series out of a dictionary, or you could directly type the dictionary inside the parenthesis when you're creating the series. Let's go ahead and capture the return value of a series into a variable called s, and I'm going to display s here. Let me talk about the representation of a series. So Pandas series has a vertical representation where you have like a column for your index, which is going to be the equivalent of keys in your Python dictionary. Every key in the Python dictionary got converted to one of the index values in the index column, and then you have the value column over here. The third column, which is not displayed here, is going to be called as integer position. Let me talk about each of these columns for this particular example. So the first column is going to be integer position, and the second column is going to be index, and the third column is going to be the value over here with respect to the representation as such. So they're not really columns, it's just they look like a column when you look at a Pandas series with respect to a display functionality. All right, so just like a list, your integer position starts at 0. So the first value is going to have an integer position 0, and then you're going to have the index as 1, and then you're going to have the value as 7. Similarly, for the next item, your integer position is going to be 1, and then your index is going to be 2, value is going to be 8. For the third item, your integer position is going to be 2, and your index is going to be 3, and your value is going to be 9. One other detail which you will observe as part of the series output is that something which is called as D type, which refers to data type, and the Int64 is not really a Python data type. It's actually coming from the C programming language. Python integers can support any large number of integers, whereas the default integer data type in C programming language only supports 32-bit integers, which enable you to represent 2 billion values. So if you want to represent more values, you'll have to use a different type in C programming language, say a long type. Int64 here refers to the fact that you can have a 64-bit integer, which means that your integer can have a maximum value of 64 ones in the binary representation. Your 64 binary positions can either have a value of 0 or 1 accordingly. The internals of Pandas module use the C programming language. That's because C programming language is so much faster than Python. So even though Pandas is a Python module, you might see some of the C based terminologies when you use the Pandas module. Right, so the first thing which I want to talk about with respect to the series is how exactly to access the values using the index. Recall that index in Pandas series is an equivalent of keys in Python dictionary. So let's first do a recap of how to access values in Python dictionary using keys. So in my dictionary D, I have 3 keys. So I can simply access the value associated with the key ONE here 1 by saying D of 1. So that will just retrieve the value corresponding to the key string 1 over here. Similarly, in Pandas series, you can say S of 1, where 1 is your index, and you should be able to retrieve the corresponding value associated with that particular index. The next option for you is to use the .loc lookup, which is going to do the exact same thing. So you can say .s.loc of 1, which is going to retrieve the same value 7 here. And in order to retrieve the value 8, you can say s.location of index 2, and that's going to retrieve a value of 8 for you. So the next thing which I want to tell you is how can you access values using integer possession. So the way for you to do that is to use what is called as .i location. It doesn't stand for index location, it stands for integer possession location. Uh, Let me give you examples of that. So in this particular series, I have integer possession 0, 1 and 2. So I can say s.iloc of 0, that's going to retrieve a value of 7 for me. And I can say s.iloc of 1, which is going to retrieve 8 for me. I could also say s.iloc of -1, just like we use negative indices in Python list, we can use negative integer possessions in Pandas series. That would give me the last value, which is going to be the value 9 over here. Similar to accessing the index 1 by saying s of 1, we could also use integer possession by saying s of 0 here. Notice that there might be ambiguity with respect to figuring out whether we are mentioning an index inside the brackets or the integer possession inside the brackets. Assume that you have a dictionary where your keys are also integers, then you might get a conflict in such an example, right? Pandas series is designed in such a way that it will retrieve the values based on index on a higher priority than on an integer possession. But it is very useful to use .iloc to explicitly say that you're talking about integer position location, and .loc to mention that you're talking about index. All right, let me also talk about how to access multiple values by mentioning a list of integer possessions. So instead of saying s of 0, we could also say s of, and inside the brackets I can mention another list. So let me say that I want to retrieve the value in integer possession 0 and in integer possession 2. Since I mentioned that we can use complicated expressions within the square brackets, here is an example for you. So I can mention a list within the square bracket, which is going to refer to the integer possessions which I want to retrieve from my original series data structure. Similarly, I can also have a list of indices. So I can say get me the values corresponding to the index 1 and 3, and that's going to again retrieve the values of 7 and 9 here. Alright, I'll wrap up this video here. In the next video, I'll show you how to create a Pandas series using a list.